Welcome back, conference, and good afternoon. It's always appropriate that we remember those who we have lost since we last gathered at our annual conference. Delegates, we have some unfinished business from this morning's session, and I seek your permission and consent that we can take some time from the Cabinet Secretary of Social Policy discussion, that we take a portion of that time so that we can deal with Resolution 12, the informed consent model for adult transition care. We did have lots of cards in for this item for this morning. I won't be able to take all of the cards submitted, but I have given careful consideration to all of those cards. So with your consent, conference, we can't take any more cards other than those that were submitted this morning. But with your consent, I would like to proceed with our unfinished business and for us to take some time to address Resolution 12 and ask your consent. So with that in mind, conference, I would like to invite Emily Chung to the stadium to come up front to propose the resolution. And Emily, you have 5 minutes to do so. And conference, Emily is the co-convener of Out for Independence. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, conference, and thank you for giving us the time to discuss this motion today and making it through the whole weekend. Conference, my sister and my stepmom are on the exact same medication. It's called estradiol. It comes in a white packet with a blue lid, about yay high, and they take it in accordance with their doctor's prescription, and they are happier and healthier for being on it. But their experience of getting this medication prescribed could not have been more different. My stepmom just managed to go to the GP and then on to the endocrinologist. It was relatively straightforward and she got it in a matter of weeks. For my sister, it took over 3 years and the process was humiliating and degrading. There's a simple reason for this. My sister is trans and my stepmom is not. Because here's the thing, conference. If you're trans in this country, you don't get to just go to a GP and ask for the care you need to be referred on to specialist services. Once you go to the GP, you are diverted to a specialist clinic called a gender identity clinic. There, you are told to see a psychiatrist who will then diagnose you with a mental illness called gender dysphoria. This then allows you to go back to your GP and be put on the same waiting list as everybody else, years after your non-trans friends and family were put on. Now, obviously, the wait involved is horrific. In Scotland, the wait is over 4 years and growing. But that's not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is the need to seek a mental illness diagnosis itself. Gender dysphoria is not an illness, not mental or otherwise. And the World Health Organization agrees, and they removed it from their manual of statistical, called the ICD-10, their manual of mental disorders, in 2019. What gender dysphoria is, conference, is a remnant of a time in psychiatry when all LGBTQ plus people were thought of as diseased and defective, where we were not seen as part of the rich and beautiful tapestry of human experience, but as a problem to be solved. And conference, that has no place in modern psychiatric medicine. Thank God. But conference, we in Scotland in 2024 still require a diagnosis of mental illness for adults to get their transition care. This is absolutely ridiculous. Let me speak to you now as a mental health nurse. For so many people, there'll be concerns around safeguarding and, for instance, what about complex cases? But let me speak here as a nurse. There is no clinical benefit to a gender dysphoria diagnosis. It does no safeguarding. It does no assessment of a patient's capacity to consent, and it provides no clinical benefit to the patients it is forced upon. To be blunt, trans people find the process of seeking this diagnosis to be degrading, humiliating, and invasive. Now, there have been some people in the media who have seen this discussion and have decided to label it as childish to resolve this issue, that it's not productive to try and fix the problem. And I have two things to say to those people in the media. The first is it's not childish to trans people, to the adults who have jobs, families, who vote and who pay taxes in this country. It is not childish to ask to be treated as adults by adult services. It is an essential part of them being treated as full and complete adults capable of making their own decisions, to be treated as equal citizens under our NHS. And the second point I will make is look at the waste. Look at it. Look at it. You need psychiatrists to give this diagnosis. But there are hundreds of thousands of pounds locked up in this system, hundreds of staff, tens of thousands of man-hours, just human hours from skilled professionals locked up in providing a service that does not produce any clinical benefit. How can we, when the NHS is in crisis, when we are desperately crying out for staff and funding, and particularly psychiatrists, I must say, how can we possibly continue to justify putting resources into a process that benefits absolutely no one? Removing this need for a diagnosis to receive care will not only benefit trans people and make it more dignified, it will allow these resources to be redistributed for the benefit of everybody. But conference, there is one basic, fundamental part. Trans adults are adults, and whatever we might think of the choices they make with their bodies, we must respect their right as adults to make them. Conference, please support this motion.
Thank you very much, Emily. Can I now ask Ailey McIntosh to come and second the resolution, please? Ailey's from Clackmannanshire. Welcome to the stage, Ailey.
Conference, it is an enormous privilege to be able to speak with you here today. Despite having joined our party as an associate member at the tender age of 13, this is my first conference and the first time that I will have addressed you. My name is Ailey McIntosh and I am 26 years old. I'm the daughter of a panel beater and a carer, and I went to one of the most deprived schools in our country. I joined our party, as aforementioned, at the age of 13 unprompted, seeing the promise that independence could hold for each and every one of us. Throughout my entire life, I have been treated as an equal by our movement, a citizen of the egalitarian Scotland to come. I am no different from any other working-class person from Clackmannanshire, no different from Vilma that runs the grocers or Connie that serves drinks in the Wetherspoons. But there are those in our society who don't see it that way. There are those who are looking for a scapegoat in the culture wars, that destructive modern phenomenon that appeals to the lowest common denominator in our society. The truth is that by quirk of birth and little else, I so happen to be transgender. Due to that quirk of birth, I've lost a job that I've loved, been laughed out of interviews, and have been denied housing. Though by far, the most egregious form of discrimination that I have faced has been at the hands of our National Health Service. I had formalised a shared care agreement with my GP. I had paid over £500 for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria due to having no reasonable hope of ever being seen by an NHS gender identity clinic due to the absolutely inhumane waiting times. Following 3 months of treatment, hormone replacement therapy and blood testing, I was suddenly dropped from care, cold turkey, no concern was given for my health, and not a word of sympathy uttered. I tried every legitimate avenue that I could for the care that I am entitled to as a taxpayer, to no avail. I was told later that the sole director of this practice had made this decision based on an article that they had read, grounded in the culture war over facts, reason and compassion. This is utterly unsustainable and unacceptably cruel. There is no fixing it while the most basic of gender-affirming care is locked behind this outdated diagnosis. GICs, some of which do not even have a full-time psychiatrist capable of providing this diagnosis, will never be able to provide timely care. Conference, please pass this resolution so that I and other trans Scots like me will no longer have to be treated as second-class citizens, despite my devotion to our movement, our society, our party and our country.
Thank you very much, Ailey.
Conference. Scotland is a song, and like any song, it must be sung together.
Thank you, Ailey. Thank you very much, Ailey. There is a card in to move the remit back. That's from Catherine Butler-Burns. Before I invite Catherine to the floor, can I just check that we actually have a seconder for the remit back? I'm very sorry, Catherine, but we don't have a seconder for the remit. Oh, there is somebody at the back. Okay, thank you. We'll get your name and details, sir. Catherine, can I invite you to the stadium, please, Catherine? She's got 3 minutes. Thank you, Catherine. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm from the Haddington branch, and I'm a first-time speaker. Thank you. Conference, I just want to say I thoroughly endorse Resolution 12, but my life has taught me that the most sacred gift any nation has is its children. This resolution does not go far enough to protect our children and adolescents. We need to protect our primary and secondary school children. Children and adolescents are children, not adults. Adolescents are emerging adults. We must listen to nature and allow puberty to take its course. Now, why am I saying this? Because in the area I live in, children are telling me that in our primary and secondary schools, gender transition is a major topic. Why? This is an adult conversation, not for children and emerging adults. And for most of us, we remember puberty. We didn't know whether we were coming or going. That's part of finding ourselves to become adults. Our schools need to be a safe place for our children to grow and develop naturally. Forcing adult themes upon children and adolescents before they are old enough to make mature and informed decisions is, in my opinion, an abuse. I am a psychotherapist, and as far as I know, the research on transgender has not been fully explored yet with regard to children. So yes, it is an abuse of our children and adolescents when a young person wants to be identified in our local school and is as a door and is supported in this by the school. We have serious problems in confusing our children more. Our children and adolescents, whom we have been gifted with, need to be protected and respected and cared for in their most vulnerable years in school. Please reflect on what I have said and support the remit back. Thank you.
Was that a point of order? Can you wait on the microphone, please? Can we have the microphone, please, so everybody can hear? And I would, because we are short of time, with respect, appeal to people to ensure that you are making a point of order, if I can say that kindly.
Convener, delegates, this motion today is about adult trans healthcare. It is nothing to do with child trans healthcare. They are two. I'm speaking as a trans adult. Trans healthcare for adults is what this is on the table just now, not children healthcare. And I'd ask the convener to reflect on that, whether this move forward is actually necessary.
So thank you for your point of order. Again, I would respectfully say I think that is a debating point. I am about to ask Emily if she wishes to exercise her right to sum up. And Emily, as the proposer of the resolution, will have the opportunity to reply to any points raised in the mover of the remit back. So if you don't mind, and with conference's consent, I would be keen that we invite Emily back for the summation. And here she is.
Hello, conference. I think Amber's already taken the words out of my mouth. This is a motion about adults and the choices adults can make to their own bodies, not children. Please vote for this motion on the basis of what it is and not what other people would try to communicate it as. Thank you.
Conference, I have some questions to put to you. We are entering the voting space. Can I ask all of those delegates who are in favour of voting for the remit back to raise their hands and cards clearly so they're visible? This is for the remit back. Those who wish to vote for the remit back. Okay, hands down. Can I ask delegates who wish to vote against the remit back to put your cards up visibly? Okay, hands down. That is a very clear message from conference that the remit back falls. Can I now put to conference the decision on the resolution? Can I ask all of those who wish to vote for the resolution to raise their hands and their cards? Hands down, please. And can I ask all of those who wish to vote against the resolution to raise their cards? Okay. Thank you very much. Hands down, please. And there is overwhelming support for Resolution 12, which is now passed. Right, thank you very much for your cooperation, conference. I very much want to keep us to time for the remainder of this afternoon. We have, can we just get some assistance over there, please? We'll just very briefly suspend for a few seconds. If people remain in their seat other than those who can give any assistance, please. Okay, I think the matter is hand. For anybody who's leaving, please do so very quickly and quietly. Can I now invite the Cabinet Secretary for Social Policy to speak to us in this fourth policy session. Shirley Ann is leading the work to combat child poverty in this country, and she will, I am sure, give you a splendid talk. So over to you, Shirley Ann.
Thank you very much, Angela. Now, I know our time has been slightly shortened for this session, but I'm grateful to Out-Friendly for bringing that resolution forward and for us being able to get through that important part of the agenda. If we can turn to the matter in question, of course, you'll all have heard our First Minister, our party leader, talking about his mission that he has put front and centre of this government's work, not just in my area of government or in Neil's and Jenny's, as we'll hear, but right across Cabinet. That eradication of child poverty was something he made very clear right from his first speech as our leader. But it is an honour and a humbling part of government to be one of the ones who will be ensuring that we carry that work on and we take the decisions that we need to take to deliver on that. Now, I think we've already seen the real benefit that the Scottish Government's decisions are making right across the country. We're delivering almost £3 billion to support people through the cost of living crisis, £134 million a year to mitigate against some of Westminster's cruelest policies, like the bedroom tax, like the benefit cap. We're pioneering game-changing policies, whether it's the baby box or the Scottish child payment. And we've always ensured that those principles, that ability for us to protect the most vulnerable and to support everybody in all our communities is at the heart of everything that we do. Now, last year, the Scottish Government increased its spending benefit children in low-income families to almost £1.4 billion. That's £430 million in Scottish child payments to families. That's, I think, another sign of the level of mitigation that we have to put in place as the Scottish Government, because the reason the Scottish child payment came into being, the reason that we've not just protected it, but we've continued to increase it, is because of the inadequacies of the Westminster social security system. But you also see the work that we're doing in other areas where we continue to push ahead with that agenda. Whether it's with our carer support payment, where we've extended the eligibility to carers in full-time education, something that's never been available to carers under the Westminster system. Whether we've also looked at expanding the eligibility of Best Start foods to reach an additional 20,000 pregnant women and young families. That's, again, another difference that we're continuing to put into place, because we recognise the cost of living crisis and we recognise our responsibility to challenge ourselves to always do more, to make that difference for our communities. Well, what does that difference mean? Now, conference, we'll have our stories, our people that we've met, whether it's in the campaigns or even indeed in our own branches, those people that have benefited from the Scottish child payment, or indeed some of the other measures that are in place. But the modelling suggests that the actions that your government is taking, our government is taking, is keeping an estimated 100,000 children out of poverty this year. Conference, that's delivery under your SNP government. And our actions that were undertaken do mean that child poverty rates are lower in Scotland than they are in the rest of the UK. Still too high, and that's why we will continue to push to go further and go faster. Analysis by the Child Poverty Action Group estimates that compared to elsewhere in the UK, low-income families in Scotland will benefit from around £28,000, or they'll be better off by the time that child turns 18. That's the real difference every single year to every family that receives those £1.4 billion of benefits that our SNP government makes. That's delivery and real change conference to people's lives right across Scotland. Now, we know we are always held back. We're always, life's made more difficult within the Scottish Government, within Scotland, to tackle child poverty, whether it's because of Brexit, whether it's because of Tory austerity, now Labour austerity, whether it's because of the pandemic. That scale of challenge has continued to increase. But our abilities aren't just restricted by the devolution setup. We've seen that year in, year out. They are actively undermined by Westminster, not just the Tories, but Labour too. Now, we did think that a new UK government might actually give us a focus on a shared agenda. We might have been able to work with those in the incoming government to make the real change that they promised to people. In that general election campaign, when we were all out in the doors, people were asking for change. People believed Labour when they talked about change. But what did they get? We've had a summer of despair. We've had a things will only get worse. Colleagues, that's not what people voted for. That's not what they told were going to happen, and it won't take them long to realise the difference that Labour will make to them. Nothing. And I'll give one example of that conference, a really clear and obvious example, the two-child cap. The two-child cap is one of the most abhorrent policies that you can have. It punishes children just for being born. You don't need research, you don't need a review like Labour have promised. We know that it's pushing children into poverty. So we said we'd work with the incoming UK government where we could, and we said that where there's common cause, we'll have joint endeavour. So on that basis, let me give some free advice to the UK ministers out there. You don't need a review. You don't need to have a consultation. You need to look at the evidence. You need to look at the impact this is making and scrap that cap. And you have the chance to do that in the budget that's coming up in the autumn. And I have to say, conference, it's not just down in Westminster that there's a real challenge on this agenda. It's not with Westminster Labour. It's with Scottish Labour as well, if you can find them since the Westminster election, as Stephen Flynn said yesterday. I was really concerned and disappointed that Scottish Labour figures have actually questioned the impact of the Scottish child payment. They've questioned our investment of the children in Scotland. That is a bizarre situation to get into, where you have the brass neck of the Scottish Labour Party criticising a policy that's actually keeping 60,000 children out of poverty. That's the change Scottish Labour want to be. They want us to roll back on the policies that are actually making a difference. So, colleagues, let's be really clear about this. The Scottish and Westminster Labour, when the SNP is in power, the Scottish child payment is here to stay. But delegates, for too long, Westminster has been holding us back. If we truly wanted to make sure that our nation's wealth is used to build that stronger and fairer society, then we all know that we need to be in control of the decisions around that. We need independence. With the limited powers that we have, with the financial constraints that we'll continue to have, regardless of the colour of the Westminster government, we will continue to strain and use every opportunity that we have to support families. But, conference, the stakes couldn't be higher. The very social fabric of our communities is at risk under Westminster. So that's why we'll redouble our energies to bring local services together across our communities to give families the best support at the earliest opportunity. And that's why we will continue to drive forward the eradication of child poverty. Colleagues, I didn't get into the SNP to mitigate against Westminster cuts. I didn't get into the SNP and to believe in independence for the changes, yes, that we've made, but for those to be limited by the decisions made elsewhere. That's why we have the real opportunity going forward to continue with the delivery that we've already been doing, to push those boundaries further, and also to ensure that we inspire our friends and our colleagues right across the country to see that with independence, we could do so much more. Thank you.
Neil?
Thank you very much indeed, Convener, and thank you to Shirley Ann for setting out in such detail the work that we're doing on what I believe is the reason why all of us are here. We want independence to build a better nation, and that starts with eradicating poverty. So that is why we're all here, and that is the #1 mission of this Scottish Government. Until we get there, of course, we need to use the powers that we have to tackle child poverty. Shirley Ann has set out in detail, very eloquently, the many areas that we're investing to do so. And for all of my time in elected politics, whether it is in the Scottish Parliament or at Westminster, that is what I have dedicated my time and focus on, is the eradication of child poverty. And in health, we have been doing what we can to contribute to this critical area of government policy. And that is because we understand the very clear link that there is between poverty and ill health, the very clear link that there is of health inequalities and the profound issues that drive people's ill health. We know that there is a direct link between austerity, 14 years of austerity, and ill health. Indeed, there are academic studies drawing a very clear and direct link between austerity and increased death rates. So that is why, conference, we must do all we can to ensure the continued health and improved health of our nation to tackle child poverty. Poverty increases your likelihood of ill health. It increases your likelihood of chronic ill health, particularly. And for those that are growing up in poverty, it makes it more likely to have a lifetime of ill health issues. So what are we doing to address this issue within the health and social care portfolio? Starting with pay, we have rightly prioritised in health and social care investing in our staff, making almost all of them the best paid anywhere in the United Kingdom. When it comes to the Agenda for Change staff, which covers almost all of health service staff, apart from doctors, dentists and senior managers, they are paid substantially more than elsewhere in the UK. And our lowest paid staff in the health service have received between 22 and 25% in pay increases over the last 3 years as part of our £1.5 billion investment in pay. Another area that I'm particularly proud of is the work being done by community link workers. Our community link workers are breaking down the barriers for people who have found it hardest to access services, whether that is health services or community-based services or income maximisation support. Our GP practices are trusted places for people to turn to for advice and for people to receive a range of advice beyond what you would ordinarily expect in a traditional healthcare setting. And we're seeing significant income maximisation changes, but also support for social prescribing, which I know colleagues across this room are incredibly interested in. The impact of being able to access leisure facilities, culture, and other elements of nature, and the benefit that that has for our physical and mental health. So community link workers are making a massive difference for people on low incomes, but also for our health services, because they are supporting people on a prevention journey, supporting them to improve their health and their situation with regards to income. There are many more interventions beyond that, like the Community Mental Health and Wellbeing Fund, the Family Nurse Partnership, the Baby Box that Shirley Ann referenced, and more that we are doing in the health and social care setting to support the government's mission to eradicate poverty. And Shirley Ann also referenced the support for carers, which highlights the fact that this is a cross-government issue, that we are collaborating across government to ensure that we're not operating silos, we are supporting people regardless of our portfolio. The support for carers obviously has a direct impact for my portfolio, as does the work that Jenny and I are embarked on around early intervention alongside education, which is absolutely crucial. We know from various studies that giving our children the best start is absolutely vital. It sets them up for the rest of their lives. And that is why we will keep doing all that we can to support an early intervention, prevention approach, which is what I've already set out to Parliament before the summer recess, is the driver behind our reform and improvement journey. So I hope the message is clear from across this panel that not only is tackling child poverty a #1 priority, but that we're collaborating across government to invest in the areas that are going to make the difference in doing just that.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. And can I hand the floor over to Jenny Goruth, please?
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Conference. Friends, we all know that the status quo isn't working for Scotland's children. Here in Edinburgh, our capital city, child poverty rates are as high as 58% in parts of Leith. It's 37% in Wester Hailes, and it's 33% in Niddrie. You don't need to travel far from the splendour of the castle or the new town to find children living in absolute poverty in Scotland in 2024. And in a few short weeks, the 18th of September will mark a decade on from a referendum which ignited hope in the next generation. A campaign which brought us thousands of new members. Aspiration, belief, things were meant to get better. The next day, it was David Cameron and English votes for English laws, and soon Brexit. Next, Theresa May and fields of wheat. Now was not the time for independence. And Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson and gold wallpaper for number 10. Champagne deliveries. Boris let the bodies pile high. Johnson. And Liz Truss. The mini-budget. 49 days. And Rishi Sunak, who didn't know any working class people. Now, Sir Keir Starmer tells us things will only get worse. Buckle up, Scotland, take your medicine, or eat your cereal. A new dawn is coming, and it must be true because Anna Sarwar said so. Read my lips, no austerity under Labour. Friends, the people of Scotland listened to Anna Sarwar, and it makes me feel uncomfortable to say it, but they did believe him. So I hope Anna Sarwar is listening, Conference, because I think he told a great big fat lie. Yeah. He lied about scrapping the winter fuel payment. He lied about millions of pounds of funding being cut at Edinburgh University. He lied about funding for Scotland's budget, which is set to be decimated further. And this is the context in which Scotland finds herself. We must not hope, we must sit quietly. Appreciate the context of Labour's inheritance. Pretend they don't have the economic levers of a normal, independent country to help struggling families. Conference, you all know that austerity is a political choice, whether red or blue. And Labour choose no cap for bankers' bonuses. They choose the 2-child cap. Labour choose Brexit. Friends, we choose to make decisions to protect the people of Scotland. And in government, it is the SNP who will always stand up for Scotland. As Shirley Ann mentioned, we choose the Scottish Child Payment, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty. We choose free tuition based on the ability to learn and never on the ability to pay. We choose We choose the school clothing grant. We choose the school clothing grant, helping hard-pressed families. We choose over £1 billion of funding during this Parliament to close the poverty-related attainment gap. The SNP chooses the baby box. The SNP chooses to pay our teachers more than anywhere else in the UK. Politics, fundamentally, is about choices. And Labour don't have to copy the Tories' homework. They choose to do it. And Conference, it is becoming clearer by the day that the choices Labour take in government reflect exactly who this Labour government really are. They will always choose bankers over bairns every day of the week. So let the message from the SNP to the UK government ring out loud and clear. If you won't take the action we need to see on child poverty, then hand over the powers to a government that will. Because, as a wise woman once said, Scotland wants to get on. Conference, I am proud to serve in this government under a First Minister who is committed to exactly that. But I look south of the border to a new UK Labour government with all the powers and all the levers at their disposal, and I am appalled at what I see. After 14 years of Tory government, which has pushed so many children and families into poverty, Labour has the opportunity to do something different, to live up to their mantra of change. But the only thing that's changed are the excuses. With all that power at their disposal, the Labour government should be ashamed. Their inaction on the two-child limit is keeping hundreds of thousands of children in poverty. Their doubling down on austerity will harm the outcomes of children in Scotland, make no mistake. And they have proven what we already knew to be true, that change, real change, progressive change, will never be on offer through Westminster. It's a system that's lurching further and further to the right every year. And with a UK Labour government under pressure from Nigel Farage and Reform, the situation is only going to get worse. It's a system that will continue to hurt the aspirations of our children, a system that knows nothing but austerity, cuts and distracting from their own failures by demonising the poorest and most marginalised in society. But we have an alternative, friends. We don't have to suffer another decade of failure under Westminster. When Sir Keir Starmer tells us that things are only going to get worse, we answer that we have a solution. That solution is taking powers away from a regressive Westminster system and putting them back in the hands of the people of Scotland. So, read my lips, that solution, Conference, is independence.
Well done.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thanks to Neil and Shirley-Ann too. We've got some questions that were submitted earlier, and there's a very specific question for you, Shirley-Ann, from Amanda in the Musselburgh branch, who is reminding us all of the 1942 Beveridge report that speaks of the vision from cradle to grave provision. And Amanda reminds us that on Friday, Conference noted the progress and reaffirmed our commitment to continue to deliver on that vision, even where others fail. Now, Labour under Starmer and Reeves is not humane progressive. It's not that party of Attlee. And one of the things that Amanda says that we have discussed, particularly in our own reflections, is that we agree SNP messaging needs firing up. Could we appropriate this trigger phase from the cradle to the grave to remind everyone what the SNP has done, is struggling to do, and where Labour has shamefully reneged?
Thanks very much. So there's a lot to unpack in that, but the core of it is a really, really important one, I think, Conference. It's to be able to remind ourselves so that we can remind our friends, family, colleagues, the real difference that the SNP can make and the delivery that we've achieved. Within the time limits, it's hard to summarise the cradle to the grave, but if you think about just the earliest years, whether it's from the baby box, the family nurse partnerships, whether it's early learning and childcare, onto the Scottish Child Payment, the most generous free school meals within the UK, the school clothing grant, the free tuition, the Job Start payment, the free bus travel for under 22s, all of those only available in Scotland, or more generous in Scotland than they are elsewhere in the UK. And it's not just about what we have delivered, but what we will continue to deliver. I mentioned just a couple of them around carers within full-time education, about also our support for young care leavers, which is developing as well. And I think that challenge to Jenny, to Neil and I, as Cabinet Secretaries, to our headquarters, is to ensure that we're getting that message right out there. It is about delivery. The First Minister's absolutely right, and there's no point us knowing about it. We should be proud of that, we should evangelise about that, and we should go out and ensure everybody knows what we will do for them in the future, because it isn't just about what we've delivered in the past, it's how under John Swinney we're going to continue to push those boundaries and continue to support people, even if it's against Labour now rather than the Tories.
Thank you. Neil, you may want to pick up on that primary question from a health perspective, but like me, you will know that this party has many midwives, health visitors and early years workers who all repeatedly make the point that the best start in life needs to happen before children are born, that we know that supporting parents, especially mothers, really matters in terms of addressing child poverty. So what are we doing about that?
Absolutely right. This goes back to, I think most people will be able to remember the work that our former Chief Medical Officer, Sir Harry Burns, led on this, the importance of maternal health for mothers, and that actually the psychology, the neurology and the life chances of children are predetermined at birth in many cases. And so the importance of the work of the likes of the family nurse partnerships, of the baby box, of the early intervention that we've already described is absolutely critical to make sure that we are giving our children the best start for all of our children. I think you can see just in the last week a further example of that, where the Scottish Government's announced the work on preeclampsia testing, making sure that we are rolling that out across all health boards across Scotland to make sure that we are capturing the need that will be there in a maternal issue sense. And I think the work that has been done by our community link workers, by our community health workers, our community midwives, our acute midwives, is absolutely fundamental, our health visitors, in ensuring that we're providing that wraparound support for families at that early stage. And I think as well, to my experience, a father of four, to the interventions that are provided through an education sense as well, the work being done by BookBugs, by some of the work on education, the collaboration that there is between health settings and the education input from that incredibly early stage, not to mention the baby box. So I think we've got a good record to speak of, as Shirley Ann set out. We need to evangelise about it. We cannot take it for granted. We must make sure that people recognise that the interventions we're making are making a difference, and that we're investing in them because we know that we make that difference.
Thank you. Jenny, you of course might want to add to the questions that I've already narrated, but there is a very specific question for you, and it comes from Michael Grigori from Mid and Upper Nithsdale branch, and in essence it's what can the government do to ensure that all of those coming out who've been raised, whether it's in foster care or other care experienced young people, aren't falling into poverty and debt. And I know that you work very closely with the Children's Minister, because she sits within your overall portfolio responsibilities, and it's something that you've championed a lot at Cabinet.
Thank you, Angela. So we know that care experienced young people's outcomes are likely to be adversely impacted because they're care experienced. So they're much more likely, for example, to be excluded when they're in school. We know it's much more likely to impact on their attainment. And so I think the work that we're leading in government, and I should say Ms Donna's leading as Children's Minister in relation to the promise, is absolutely fundamental in that regard. But more broadly, because I know the questioner asked about support, I think it's important that all of the funding that we consider within all of our respective portfolios has its own bespoke approach to how we support people with care experience. So, for example, the Scottish Attainment Challenge that I mentioned earlier is £1 billion of funding during this parliamentary term. And within that, as Shirley Ann will recall, there's a specific strand which is about supporting care experienced young people. So we've got a really strong offer on the Virtual Head Teacher programme, which is working specifically with care experienced young people to help get them back into school if for whatever reason they've not engaged or they've been unable to attend as a result of where they might be living. That programme's going in to provide direct support. But we're also providing extra support with the cost of living in terms of the cost of the school day. So we've eradicated the cost of school trips, for example, additional charges that young people might have experienced in the past, which we know harm particularly those from care experience. We've also been able to expand the free school meals programme, and we're looking more generally at how we can provide additionality to Scotland's schools who, I think as one head teacher put to me, and I mentioned in the EIS Fringe earlier today, stepped up during the pandemic when every other service it felt stepped back. And I think when I go into schools as Education Secretary, I'm always struck by the additionality that our schools are now providing. I think I saw Cecil in the audience, I can see her right there. But if I could just pick on Falkirk Council as an example, Cecil, when we undertook the visit last year, we met with pupils in your constituency in a high school in your area, and they had in that high school a Take What You Need trolley, and they had school supplies, they had toiletries, I think there were snacks as well. And within that, it was really powerful, I think, to see the young people looking after each other, caring for one another, that additionality existed within the school. But you know what? They shouldn't have to do that. The school shouldn't have to. A school shouldn't have to plug the gaps of the welfare state because it has failed, and too often that is what's happening. So we need to also resolutely focus on bringing those powers back to Scotland that would help us to make a difference to support care experienced young people in particular, but particularly those living in poverty too. And as CPAG has noticed, I think just last year, many of the factors causing families to risk deep poverty in the coming months and years are well beyond the Scottish Government's control. So we're talking about the bedroom tax and the millions of pounds we spend mitigating against that. We're talking about the 2-child cap and the bedroom tax. So I think it's really important that whilst we put that additionality in and we protect it to help care experienced young people, we continue to advance the case for those powers coming back to Scotland so that we can better support the people that we represent and care for.
Thank you, Jenny. You spoke about the unfairness in schools having to plug a Westminster welfare gap, but also about the need for people and services to step out with their silos. And this is a question for all the panel. How can all of the public sector, all of those public sector partners, whether that's national government, local government, health boards, other public agencies, all work together in this common endeavour to end child poverty, to both avoid gaps and duplication? And I'll start with Shirley Ann.
Thanks. So I think we've got some really good examples of where that's already happening. Jenny spoke about some of that within the school settings, but if I can just give another couple of examples. We've got brilliant work happening in Dundee and in Glasgow, where the councils are working with the third sector and with national government and their agencies to do things differently. Now, that can all sound a little bit boring and a little bit bureaucratic, but you know what that actually means? Is that the number of children that are going into care in Glasgow has decreased dramatically. Because we've made the difference. We're no longer thinking about designing services for what suits us as government or as a council or as an organisation. We're actually making sure that we're delivering what people need. And this is why it's really, really important, I think, that we look at the challenge that we've got and we rise up to that challenge. We've seen that the financial situation is not going to get any better under Labour than it was the Tories. It could do, that's their choice, but it certainly doesn't look like it will. So, yes, we have to point that context out and we will hold them accountable to it, as I'm sure the Scottish people will in 2026. But in the meantime, we need to ensure that we continue to do more for vulnerable children, vulnerable families, anyone in poverty in our society. And we do that by changing the way that our services are delivered so that we are actually delivering what people need. We showed during the pandemic, under the worst of circumstances, that we can break down silos, we can do things differently, and we can work in different ways. The challenge for national government, for local government, for all of us, is are we slipping back into the ways of doing things in the past? And I think the answer to that sometimes, often, is yes. And that's one of the things that our First Minister, our party leader, has made very clear to all of us, is that we can't do that. There is not the financial leeway to just think, well, we'll just try and continue as we are, but somehow deliver better for people. We have to rise to that challenge, just as we did during the pandemic, of doing things differently, to do them correctly and effectively and at the earliest opportunity for people. So while the question is about public sector partners and service provision, what we're actually meaning for is how do we actually help people when they need it, as soon as they need it, and in the right way. Get the bureaucracy out the way, get the way we've eyed in things out the way, and actually, again, challenge ourselves to deliver for people.
Thank you, Shirley-Ann. Neil?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Shirley-Ann said, and I think there are some examples of that I can touch on in the health and social care setting. But it's also about recognising that it's often, sometimes, service delivery can sometimes be done better by our community and voluntary service partners. And so there is a need for us in the health service and in local government to make sure that we are partnering with expert organisations that can provide bespoke wraparound support. And I can think of a couple examples of where that's the case, particularly in drug and alcohol support. We've spoken, I had the discussion from the podium yesterday around where we are. I think the investment that we're making through CORA and others in the community organisations that are providing that holistic support for families and individuals with drug dependency is inspiring. And often, an example like that, it's difficult for statutory services to be able to do that in the same way because we're talking about people delivering those services with lived experience. Another example of where we can see a better join up between statutory services and community voluntary services, or indeed other services in the community, is through the community link workers. They are the name is in the title. They are delivering that linkage between GP practices, potentially local government services, and community and voluntary services that are available for people on a social prescribing basis, but also on an income maximisation basis, to make sure that they're getting their health and well-being well catered for. So I think we've got, I think Shirley-Ann is absolutely right. We cannot do things as we have done, but we've also got examples to demonstrate that we're already on that journey of service reform, and that we're absolutely shoulder to the wheel behind doing that to make sure that we're putting all of our resource that's available to us to best use.
Thanks, Neil. Jenny?
Thanks, Angela. I absolutely agree with Shirley-Ann and Neil's comments. And I suppose from an education perspective, we just again highlight that we already in education are doing quite a lot of cross-portfolio working, particularly in relation to the Scottish Attainment Challenge work. So I was just thinking about examples of the way in which SAC funding is being used by head teachers in their own communities who have the power, and the decision-making power, I think, is really important, that rests with them to choose where they put that additionality. So, for example, Cecil, I'm going to pick on you again, but Falkirk have got a great example of using income maximisation officers in their schools, helping families to get extra thousands of pounds going to families, helping them. But at the same time, that engages families in the learning of their young people because they're coming into school, they know their families, they know their cohort. Other examples where SAC's being used is in relation to Bernardo's, for example, who I know work in schools in Fife. I was in the DAPL in Leven, the Drug and Alcohol Partnership that we have in Leven in my own constituency recently. They have a number of workers working across Fife, including in my own constituency, funded from that additionality from Scottish Government. So there's 3 really clear-cut examples of different partners, not necessarily education partners, working in our schools because of additionality coming from the SNP and government. So obviously I'm going to lift up my homework and say this is a great example, so please copy me. But I do think that education naturally is quite good at using other services to work with them to improve outcomes for children and young people. And I think the SAC programme is one which we should learn from. Let's remember it was introduced back in 2015, so it's nearly 10 years old now. And when it was introduced back in 2015, it was additional. And what I hear from head teachers now in terms of their experience of it is it's no longer additional because, of course, of the erosion of the welfare state by austerity policies coming from elsewhere. So we need to look again at how we can help to support schools and to join those budgets up, as to your question, Angela. But I do think the SAC programme is a really good starting point for us to learn from in education.
Okay, thanks very much, Jenny. Shirley-Anne, before I ask you to sum up, a wee birdie tells me that you've got a birthday tomorrow. And I believe it's a special birthday. I won't, however, say how special a birthday or which decade it is or anything like that. It is a birthday that will, of course, end with a 0. But of course, we all know that 50 is the new 30, isn't it? Look behind you.
Thank you. I would...
Happy birthday to you.
There's no finer way to spend your birthday. Thank you, Commissioner. There is no finer way to spend your birthday, obviously, than being at SNP Conference. Drinks are not on me just after this session. It would be remiss of me not to point out, actually, that Jenny has also had a significant birthday this year. Although I would hasten to add, before our friendship ends on stage, not the same one as I am celebrating. And also that our First Minister has also celebrated a birthday, although not the same one as I am celebrating either. But anyway, it's been a year of significant birthdays all round. We thank you very much in our joint, what did we make it, a joint 180th?
Oh, I'm not that old.
Yeah, I hope you've checked your arithmetic. Okay. Great. Listen, thank you very much, colleagues, for that contribution. Can we give Shirley-Anne, Neil and Jenny a huge round of applause? Right, let's get on to our topical resolutions. The first topical that will be up this afternoon will be the topical on the winter fuel allowance. And can I invite Chris Hanlon to move that, please? Now, if you make your way to the stage, Chris. Chris is having to do the 100-metre sprint again. Well, you've got 5 minutes to deliver it.
Oh, good luck with that. We had a discussion at a recent branch executive meeting where we were discussing the impending deluge of planned austerity coming from the new high priestess of the neoliberal economic cult, Rachel Reeves. Am I not close enough? Right, I'll start again. Did you hear any of that? No. We had a discussion at a recent branch executive meeting where we were discussing the impending deluge of planned austerity coming from the new high priestess of the neoliberal economic cult, Rachel Reeves. The main topic of conversation was the recently announced shocking attack on retired people on fixed incomes that are teetering on the edge of fuel poverty. Several of the mostly middle-aged white males were pontificating that maybe we were making a mistake in pouring ever-increasing amounts of funding into mitigating the cuts that consistently come from Westminster. Maybe what was needed was to let Labour own their mess and just to let the cuts happen. Thankfully, a wiser voice in the form of our Treasurer Carol spoke up and gave us all a damned could tell it off. Retired people deserve better than that from us. They are the people who have worked all their lives to create the world that we all enjoy, and they should be able to enjoy their retirement with dignity. And apart from anything else, they represent the largest demographic of voters that are still to be persuaded to vote yes in a future referendum, de facto or otherwise. So after a bit of thought, we settled on saying this. We know that budgets are tight, but we cannot not try and find any way to mitigate the damage. In Scotland, we have a distinct advantage in having a more progressive taxation system than the rest of the United Kingdom. We have a lower, a basic and an intermediate rate that happen to be placed at levels that are less harsh than what Rachel Reeves is proposing, which is cutting off retired people at like 12 grand. It's just ludicrous. So what we're suggesting is that the Scottish Government look at least investigate the possibility of taking the money they do have and making the breakpoints, rather than pension benefit, look at the income tax levels and seeing if you can graduate it out so that people stop getting any winter fuel payment at about 25 grand, which is where the intermediate rate comes in, and it eases out. So we don't have the situation which we're going to have very shortly, where people that are a pound over the limit on really tight incomes are going to lose lots and lots of money and are going to be tipped right into fuel poverty as a result, which is just a disgraceful thing to have happen at the hands of a Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's just shocking. So please support the resolution. Thank you.
Oh, right, sir. Well, I'll see if that can be remedied. I know it was shared earlier this morning. Right, there it is. Thank you. Thank you for that, sir. Okay, can I invite Shirley-Anne Somerville to second this resolution, please? Shirley-Anne, since it's your birthday.
Thank you, Conference, and hello again. Conference, we've heard during that policy discussion we've just had about the fact that we were ready to work with an incoming UK government to tackle poverty. You've heard how the Scottish Government stood ready to reset that relationship with the UK Government. Well, I certainly played my part. I had my introductory meetings with my relevant Secretaries of State. What a shame it took not just a matter of months, but a matter of weeks for that not just to be tested, but to be broken. What a shame it was under a Labour government, that we have had a £160 million cut from our budget this financial year. Now, that's 90% of the cost of the pension age winter payments that I was literally due to take through Parliament within the coming days. So no time to change the policy, the programme, the ability for our agency to adapt. With just one announcement, with no consultation, with no discussion, with a blink of an eye, the Chancellor has taken that £160 million out of our budget, and with that, our ability to make changes in the time that we wish to do so. Now, there's certainly been a reset in government relations. I would say that that's correct. We didn't actually expect that reset for things to actually get worse. But Keir Starmer was right, Conference. Things can only get worse. He's demonstrated it already, and he's demonstrated it on the backs of our pensioners. What a damning indictment to the start of Labour's legacy here in Scotland. Conference, you know that SNP ministers will continue to do whatever we can to mitigate against the worst excesses of Westminster. We always have. We always will. But I've also now been responsible for devolved social security for half its lifetime. And maybe it is because there's a significant birthday coming up tomorrow. I'm starting to feel a bit reflective about that. Now, our new approach is showing a difference. I hear that when I recently met with carers in Lanarkshire, when I met with disabled people in Grangemouth, when I met with disabled young people's parents in a school recently. That is making a difference. That's the choice that we have and we will continue to take. But Conference, I am sick and tired of mitigating. I'm sick and tired of trying to hold back the tide of Westminster austerity. Conference, please support this resolution.
Conference, we have no cards against this resolution, and I seek your consent that we pass this resolution by acclaim. Conference, the next topical resolution is entitled The Recent Racist Riots and the Threat of Fascism in the UK. And I hope, yes, great, it's appeared on the screens behind me. And can I invite Councillor Fatima Joji to come and move this motion? Fatima, welcome. Warm welcome for Fatima.
Conference, thank you. In May 2022, one of our former SNP MPs stood up in Parliament and said, "Over the last 12 years, I fear we are sleepwalking, closer and closer to the F word. I know everyone is scared to say it for fear of sounding over the top and being accused of going too far. But I say this with all sincerity. When I say the F word, I'm talking about fascism, fascism wrapped in red, white and blue. It happens subtly. While Mary Black, you were absolutely right. Recent events are proof that your warnings were not too extreme. Recent events, 3 young girls, BB King, just 6 years old, Elsie Dot Stancombe, age 7, and Alice De Silva Aguirre, only 9. They were attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance class, and during what should have been a joyous occasion, they were murdered. I mention their names so that we remember them, because within hours of this tragedy, fascists and extremists cynically exploited it to incite racist, Islamophobic and anti-immigrant violence, targeting mosques, community centres and shops across more than 30 English towns and cities, and in Belfast. These actions disrupted the grieving process for the families and friends of the girls, denying them the dignity and peace they deserve to mourn. And over the years, these fascists, who usually spread their hatred behind closed doors, have become emboldened, publicly using social media to threaten to organise in some cities in Scotland on September 7th. Conference, I think we can all agree that such criminality absolutely has no place in Scotland. Fascists thrive on exploiting our fears, seizing on issues like the cost of living crisis and the NHS to manipulate us into blaming vulnerable communities, especially immigrants and asylum seekers. And then there are fascist enablers, those who stoke these flames of division. Some of these enablers sadly operate through our media and politics. They want us to blame immigrants for our woes, but I say this, the NHS would face collapse without the vital contributions of our immigrants. These far-right views are not an exercise in freedom of speech, because freedom of speech does not equate hate speech. This is fueled by disinformation, malinformation, racism, so deeply entrenched and taught because we all know, I know, you know, that no one is born with hate in their heart or mind. It is learned behaviour that can be addressed by tackling the root causes, which is entirely possible. It is vital that we recognise, despite all these events, The positive community support for minorities and asylum seekers across Scotland, England and Northern Ireland, and I must commend our own First Minister's proactive response and support following these unsettling events. I have also read online, as recent as this morning, that this issue is a problem down south, so it sort of implies that Scotland were untouched. But Scotland's not immune to the insidious forces of fascism, even though Scotland has not yet seen the same level of chaos. So it's crucial that we remain vigilant with preventative and proportionate measures. Our sense of security must not blind us to the very real threats that seek to undermine our democratic values and our communities. In terms of solutions, our media, our academics, our politicians, I include myself in this, we all have a duty of care here. It's crucial we safeguard the well-being and safety of our citizens and asylum seekers, many of whom are fleeing unimaginable horrors. Safety is not merely a fundamental right, it's a cornerstone of human dignity and security. And I will stress, this is a message coming from Scotland to asylum seekers and refugees. You are not illegal, you are welcome here, and we want to make sure you're safe here. We have made a number of asks in this motion. I won't read them all out, but it includes encouraging our governments across the UK to collectively promote democratic values, responsible media reporting, improved legislation, especially on this bin fire that is social media, police training and the prescription of violent far-right groups. I realise I'm running out of time, so I think the last thing I'll say, this is a public forum. I know this is being live streamed, so I'm addressing this to anyone who will listen. This is Scotland. We will wake up every morning, turn to our neighbours, our friends, the people who we meet in our shops, on our streets, reminding everyone through our peaceful actions and words that fascism will not succeed in raising its violent and destructive head in our bonny Scotland. Conference, thank you.
Well said, Fatima. Can I ask Councillor Graham Campbell to come and second the motion, please? Thank you. Warm welcome to Graham, please.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Conference. And what an excellent introduction by Fatima there. It's hard to follow that, but I'm going to try. I've lived through 4 upsurges of racism and fascist violence in my lifetime, and each of them has been preceded by an upsurge in the xenophobia, racist targeting and scapegoating of immigrants, of migrants, of asylum seekers, in the media, in the mainstream media, in the mouths of Labour, Tory and even Liberal politicians back in the day. It always came from the mainstream. And then you heard it in the mouths of those people trying to beat you up on the streets. Back in the 70s, it was the National Front saying, if they're black, send them back, as Enoch Powell once said. We used to say back to him, disembowel Enoch Powell, but we meant that figuratively. I want to make clear that we meant that figuratively. But let's be clear, in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher took up the voices of the National Front's rhetoric when they got 100,000 votes in one election one time. And she said, we are rather swamped, aren't we? As we were rather swamped by her pseudo-monetaristic neoliberalism, and all of our towns were closed down. But you see the pattern here. In the 90s and noughties, under New Labour, the conditions were created for the BNP to rise to be the fascist party, and then the EDL and others. There is a pattern here, and it is that you have the mainstream politicians shamefully using rhetoric that will therefore embolden and encourage these far-right extremists. These are terrorists that you're talking about here. And that's what we have to call it. This is naked, fascist, Islamophobic terrorism. And it must not stand. We know that words can maim and can kill. It means something when Farage, Sunak and even Starmer says, stop the boats, because you heard those words used on the rioters' lips as they were throwing bricks and Molotov cocktails at mosques. This is what these words mean. And we have to understand that that's what it is. So if you don't call it out, and I haven't heard Keir Starmer say the word Islamophobia during this whole month since this crisis emerged. So where do we stand? Where do we come in as the SNP? Well, of course, we have to look at where this comes from. And of course, it comes from colonialism. It comes from imperialism. It comes from the white supremacist ideas that those rioters have in their minds because they don't get a proper lesson about their own history. If they knew their own history, they wouldn't be on the streets doing that. So, in Scotland, we have tried our best to try and counter that with our notion of a Scotland that is non-imperialist, that breaks up the UK imperial estate once and for all, ends the empire for good. Like Dracula, it keeps coming back, but you have to keep stabbing it in the heart with a stake. And I mean that figuratively, folks. Okay. But seriously, you know, it's a battle you have to keep winning and winning again because racism is clever, Islamophobia is clever, anti-Semitism is clever. It reinvents, recreates itself, recreates new forms like xeno-racism, of the kind you saw against Polish migrants and Eastern European migrants. It's clever, it mutates. And as it mutates, you have to kill the virus. And you kill the virus by education. You do it by proper history, it taught in schools at the earliest point, so people know about white supremacy and racism. It also requires us to unite our communities from below. And I was very proud that the SNP BAME Network had their fringe yesterday, and Corcab was there on the platform, gave an incredible contribution there, as did the Show Racism Red Card, and the coalition that we're part of, which is United We Stand, from south side of Glasgow. Citizens showed across the UK that when you mobilise peacefully and determinedly, you remove the room for racism and fascism to take hold. And that's what we need to do on September the 7th when it comes, because in Glasgow, I'm very proud of our people. They showed time and time again that people make Glasgow and that there is no room for racism and fascism in Scotland. The word is love, as Michael Manley once said. He was a great Jamaican democratic socialist and prime minister. And he used to say, the word is love, and you defeat hate with love and compassion. So show that in your numbers on September the 7th.
Thank you very much, Graham, for that powerful contribution and supporting Fatima's great speech earlier. Conference, there are no cards against this resolution, and can I propose to delegates that we pass this by acclaim? Now, Conference, I'm going to hand you over to our National Secretary, Lorna Finn. This will be the last time that Lorna will sit on this podium in her capacity as National Secretary. Anyway, who knows what the future holds, Lorna? And I just want to put on record my heartfelt appreciation to Lorna. Lorna is the most straight-talking person I have ever met in my life. But I know that I, like many others, have always appreciated her grit and determination to put the party's interests first. And as we have reflected, we have had some turbulent times recently. But of course, it's the people who help us through the turbulent times that steer us to smoother waters. So can we all thank Lorna Finn very much for her public service. But she does have one last job to do, and that is to inform delegates and our members, the length and breadth of Scotland, the result of our elections, our internal party elections. So, over to you, Lorna.
Thank you very much, and thanks for doing that before I have to speak. That was nice. Okay, I have the results of the elections for National Office Bearers and the National Executive Committee from My Voice, our ballot service provider. A full breakdown of the election results will appear on the Members' Hub later, as will the results of the election of Conferences Committee, the Policy Development Committee and the Members' Conduct and Appeals Committee. The names of the members selected unopposed are in the nomination section of the conference agenda. I can advise that the National Office Bearer elections are as follows. Maureen Watt is elected as President. Alex Kerr is elected as National Secretary. Katie Loudon is elected as Local Government Convener. Deirdre Brock is elected as Policy Development Convener. Naz Anis Mia is elected as Member Support Convener. Naz is a fan. Katie Hagman is elected as Women's Convener. Sadie Matthews is elected as Equalities Convener. For the elections to the National Executive Committee, Victoria Cameron and Stephen Shilton are elected for the Central Scotland region. Alison Thewlis and Christina Cannon are elected for the Glasgow region. Ian Coburn is elected for Highlands and Islands, and the all-female contest is unopposed. Sinead Collins and Silas McGilvery are elected for the Lothian region. Alicia Hayes and Alan Smith are elected for Mid-Scotland and Fife. Siobhan Toland and Logan Unwin are elected for the North East of Scotland region. Anne Ferguson and Marshall Douglas are elected for South of Scotland region. And finally, Michelle Campbell and Michael Gibbons are elected for the West of Scotland region. Congratulations to you all.
Congratulations to everyone who's been elected or re-elected, and commiserations to those who've put their name forward. But it is important that people do continue to put their name forward for the sake of democracy. Graham, why are you waving at me? Oh, BAME convener.
That was in the fold, sorry. Shelley Ann Brown is elected as BAME convener.
Thank you, Graham, for that very timely and apt intervention. It is appreciated. And congratulations once more to everybody. Commiserations to those that were unsuccessful on this occasion, but it is vital that people continue to put their names forward. And I have one more little task to do, and again, on behalf of you all, just to show our appreciation to Lorna and to present her a little token of that.
What gets me up in the morning? In a word, Scotland. The sheer beauty of our country, where I live, the countryside I walk through, the paths I run on, and the people I meet, going about their daily lives, working, spending time with their loved ones, their families. Now the Scotland we all care about is facing the biggest financial challenge since devolution began. We were told there would be no austerity under Labour, but within weeks of coming into power, the Labour government refused to scrap the two-child cap and then went on to deny winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners across the country. I call that austerity with a capital A. For Scotland, the knock-on effect of these Westminster policies are devastating, putting at risk hundreds of thousands of the most vulnerable in our society, our elderly, our children, and families still struggling with the cost of living crisis. And one thing's for sure, over the next few months, we're going to see more and more cuts heading our way. Which means some of the policies we hold dear in Scotland, policies that have given young people the best start in life and better opportunities, and policies that have meant more investment in the National Health Service, these are all at risk from the cuts coming from Westminster. As the First Minister of Scotland, you have my word that my government will work tirelessly to protect Scotland from Labour-imposed austerity. But we shouldn't be in this position, where decisions made in Westminster have so much negative impact on the people of Scotland. We have many strengths in our country today: abundant natural resources, a population brimming with talent and potential, in green energy, finance and technology, food and drink, world-class universities. We've got what it takes to create growth, to create jobs, and to create a more prosperous Scotland. What we don't have are the powers to make Scotland the best that Scotland can be. Those powers come only with independence, with Scotland's future in Scotland's hands, and that will always be our ambition. Morning, noon and night. SNP for Scotland.
Friends, we come to the end of our 90th annual conference, and I think we can all agree that this has been a 3 days filled with honest reflection, healthy debate, and undeniable optimism for the future. And I think that is perhaps to the consternation of some of our opponents. There was one quote in the media that caught my eye, which said there had been an absence of star quality. I don't know if they've just seen Fatima's address to this conference, or many other addresses, especially from our young people in this audience today. We have got star quality in abundance, but if your definition of star quality is Boris Johnson, you know what you can do with your star quality. Incidentally, if you don't, I can introduce you to 2 million Scots and many others across the UK that will tell you what you can do with your star quality and Boris Johnson. But the strength and the ambition of the SNP will always be what sets us apart from other parties, and that is what will take us forward to 2026 and beyond. And friends, I can think of nobody better placed to lead us forward than our party leader, who we've just heard from, John Swinney. And John has stepped up when his party and his country needed him most. And he's been able to do that because of the incredible support and love of his family and loved ones. And John Swinney is not the only member of the Swinney household who's making substantial sacrifices in the cause of our party and our country. He has made significant personal sacrifices, and I want to thank him for doing so. And I should also say, this happens to be the 45th year of John's membership of the SNP. And that, for those who've done a little bit of arithmetic, is half of the life of the SNP. It's also 45, a very significant number for most of us. But I'm very confident that from 45 years in the SNP, and over the next 5 years, we will see John Swinney take us over that magical 50 mark. And that will be the stamp of success, both for John Swinney, for our party, and for our country, if we can breach that 50% mark that we were so close to back in 2014. So friends, to close our conference, to take us forward, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you the SNP party leader, the the First Minister of Scotland, my friend, John Swinney.
Conference, it is an immense privilege for me to address you today for the first time as Scotland's First Minister. I want to begin by paying tribute to my predecessor, Humza Yousaf. Humza is a great friend to so many of us in this party. He is a good and a fine man, a passionate campaigner for the SNP and for independence. He has served our country with distinction, and I thank Humza from the bottom of my heart. In his time as First Minister, Humza championed the values of equality, opportunity and community. That's the kind of Scotland I know all of us in this party are striving to achieve. We yearn for a world defined by love and compassion, where human rights and the rule of law are not just respected, but they are celebrated. Humza was one of the first and remains a leading voice demanding an immediate ceasefire and the return safely of all hostages in Gaza. Let the message from this conference be heard loud and clear. The killing of innocent men, women and children must end, and it must end now. Sadly, and perhaps even more dangerously, the conflict is now spreading to the West Bank, and we've heard today the awful loss of life amongst hostages that have been taken. The suffering on all sides has gone on for far too long, so a ceasefire is essential. The sending of UK arms to Israel must stop. All hostages must be returned. Israelis and Palestinians must be able to live in peace, and that peace must be based on a two-state solution and a viable, sovereign Palestinian state. Conference, the agony we see daily on our television screens reminds us of our common humanity. As we watch the suffering and the loss of loved ones endured by so many in the Gaza conflict, it reminds us of what really matters in life. It reminds us that it is the love of those around us that makes us thrive. And for me, that has been central to what I have done in the last few months. Before I could respond to the many calls from across this party for me to stand for leadership, I had to be certain that those I love would be all right if I was First Minister. As many of you know, my wife Elizabeth has multiple sclerosis. Elizabeth's condition is something that affects our lives every minute of every day. We have to make plans. We have to make adjustments. We have to sometimes accept that some things are just not possible to do. But despite all of that, Elizabeth remains determined that her condition should not stop her and those around her from living life to the full. I can only lead this party and be First Minister of Scotland because Elizabeth is prepared to make the sacrifice of not having her husband around quite as much as she probably needs. So, to Elizabeth, thank you so much for the sacrifice you're making so I can serve our country. Outside of my immediate family, I've been part of the SNP family for most of my life. I joined the SNP in 1979. To put it mildly, it wasn't the easiest of times. We'd had a bad election result and lost the majority of our seats. We had 17% of the vote. Devolution, let alone independence, was off the table. Like others, I decided that it was in the difficult times that it was most important to step up and to make a contribution. It wasn't easy. We went through some of the toughest times this party has ever had, but the hard work paid off. We helped create our national parliament. The people of Scotland trusted us to be their government, and the prospect of a better future with independence became the dominant debate of Scottish politics. And delegates, it's only because the SNP stepped up then that we are able to deliver for the people of Scotland now. Tens of thousands of parents are going out to work, helped by the expansion of childcare that we have delivered. Tens of thousands of Scottish students are attending some of the finest universities in the world without paying a single penny in tuition fees, and lots more of them are coming from deprived backgrounds because we made that happen. And around 100,000 children are being kept out of poverty because we introduced policies like the Scottish Child Payment. The SNP stepped up. We are transforming the lives of people in Scotland, and we should be proud to say that to our country. Once again, it's time for us all to step up. I joined the SNP not because I wanted a political career. I joined the SNP because I believe in Scottish self-government, taking decisions in Scotland for Scotland. I believe that is the key to unlocking a better future for the people who choose to live here. I believe that to be the case now more than ever, with all of my head and all of my heart. July the 4th was clearly an incredibly tough night for the SNP. So many great colleagues lost their seats, and I want to, as your leader and First Minister, thank every one of them for their service to their communities and to our country. We've reflected as a party, and we're learning the lessons of that election. But today, I want to talk about how we're going to go forward to a better future. A better future for our party, and more importantly, a better future for our country. Firstly, let me address all of you in this hall and the wider party around the country. You are the people who knock the doors, make the calls, stuff the envelopes. Nowadays, click the keyboards. The people who innocently turn up to local branch meetings and find yourselves leaving as an office bearer. The people who campaign enthusiastically even in the very worst weather that Scotland can throw at you for the cause that binds us together. All of you, every one of you, deserve the most professional, modern, dynamic, election-winning organisation. And hear me when I say this. That is what I am going to deliver so we can win in 2026. When I stood for the party leadership back in May, I said I would enable honest, candid, respectful internal debate within the party. That we could all have our say, and then once we've agreed how to proceed, we stick together. That is internal democracy in action. We have our say, and then we move on together. That's what's happened at this conference. That's what's going to happen in the future. That is the foundation of a confident, sure-footed Scottish National Party that is able to lead our country to success. We also have to make sure that we're heard by the public, and only earn the right to be heard by the public when we are focused, not on ourselves, but on making life better for the people of Scotland. As SNP leader and First Minister, it's my responsibility to make sure this is the case. I don't want our party looking inwards. I want our party looking outwards, speaking with the people of Scotland, serving the people of Scotland, proving we are the party best able to take Scotland forward. It's just a few weeks since I re-entered frontline politics. When I became First Minister, I spoke of my desire for a less polarised national debate. I gave a promise that I would work to bring our country together as First Minister, to serve everyone who chooses to make Scotland their home. Recently, sadly, in other parts of the United Kingdom, we saw far-right, Islamophobic and racist thugs trying to stoke division. People fleeing oppression overseas feared for their lives in the United Kingdom. They deserved and expected sanctuary, but they ended up under attack. People applying for asylum should never have to face that. They should feel safe. They should not feel fearful. As Scotland's First Minister, I reached out and I heard firsthand from members of Scotland's Muslim community, from members of Scotland's Jewish community, and from other faith and community leaders. And let me make a few things clear. This party will never, ever denigrate people who honour us by choosing to make Scotland their home. Migrants have enriched our country in so many ways. Refugees are welcome here. And whether it is anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or any form of prejudice, the Scottish National Party will always stand up for a country free of hatred and intolerance. And delegates, we will never be found wanting when the world has to step up. Scotland opened her doors when Russia launched its war of aggression on Ukraine. Conference today, just as we did on the 24th of February 2022, we stand with the people of Ukraine. Now, Conference, I know I speak for every single person in this hall when I say we are very glad to see the back of the Tory government. If ever we needed proof that the Westminster system is broken, the last 14 years have provided the evidence. I've made clear that the SNP government will work in good faith with the new Labour government if, and I stress the word if, it is in the interests of the people of Scotland to do so. If the Prime Minister wants to start unpicking the damage of 14 years of Conservative rule, then he will find a willing partner in me. And delegates, there's an awful lot to unpick. A good start for the Labour government would be to unpick the erosion of the devolved powers of the Scottish Parliament carried out by the Tories under the excuse of Brexit. The first sign that a Labour government will work constructively with Scotland would be to restore the powers of the Scottish Parliament and reverse the damage done to our powers by the discredited Tory government. But I have to say, when I listen to some Labour frontbenchers, I fear their vision is very different from ours and very different to the wishes of the people of Scotland. Labour's Health Secretary wants to hold the door wide open to private sector involvement in the NHS. That might be Labour's plan. It's not our plan. The SNP will keep the National Health Service in public hands. Our NHS will never be up for sale. Labour's Foreign Secretary thinks Labour should be as proud of creating the UK's weapons of mass destruction as they are of creating the National Health Service. The SNP wants to get rid of nuclear weapons, and with independence, Trident will be removed from Scotland once and for all. Labour is embracing Brexit. With independence, Scotland will be at the heart of Europe as an equal, independent member state. And Labour have announced not the end of Tory austerity, but an intensification of Tory austerity. You might remember a beautiful moment during the election campaign when the Labour leader in Scotland said to me and to the people of Scotland, "Read my lips. No austerity under Labour." Within weeks, the Chancellor stood up and announced £22 billion worth of spending cuts. That is politics at its most cynical. A total breach of trust with all those who supported Labour. This then has been a watershed week for the UK and for Scotland. I believe it will go down as an era-defining moment. A Labour Party that promised change is delivering more of the same Tory debt rule, the same Tory cuts agenda. Labour hasn't delivered change. Labour is delivering the same damaging austerity as the Tories. Conference, I want to chart a very different course for our country. On my very first day as SNP leader, I said I wanted to lift every child in Scotland out of poverty. I was lucky as a child. As a family, there wasn't a lot of money around, but we didn't live in poverty. But nearly 50 years ago here in this city, when I went to Forrester High School, it was clear to me that some of my classmates were growing up in poverty. And now, nearly 50 years on, my youngest son attends a local school in Perth where there are children, my constituents, growing up in the self-same poverty. After the passage of half a century, the persistence of child poverty is testament to how Westminster has totally and utterly failed Scotland. This week, Labour attacked the SNP for the spending decisions we've made in government as part of our progressive, modern, left-of-centre agenda. It was a rather baseless attack, given that the SNP government has balanced the budget every single year since 2007. But we have taken spending decisions, and believe you me, I'm proud of them. We're spending hundreds of millions of pounds to lift children out of poverty. Through the Scottish Child Payment, we're putting £26.70 a week directly into the hands of low-income families for each eligible child, a measure described as the most significant intervention in tackling inequality in Europe since the 1980s. That is what your SNP government is doing. And Labour. The Labour government is pushing tens of thousands of children in Scotland into poverty by keeping the Tory, now the Labour, two-child cap. By sticking to Tory debt rules, and by extension forcing the whole of the UK to do the same, Labour appear to want us to abandon low-income families, to abandon children in poverty. Delegates, we are not going to do that. Let's instead resolve together to abandon the whole rotten Westminster system. That's what we should be abandoning. Conference, next week I will set out our programme for government, building on the SNP record, building on our beliefs that investing in our people, our public services and our planet is the means to building prosperity for all. In an era of Westminster cuts, we're going to have to work harder and smarter if we're to deliver on our ambitions for Scotland. But this party has never, ever been afraid to work hard in pursuit of a better Scotland. That is what we all came into politics to do. So next week, I will set out how we can tailor support better to families, ensuring they get the help they need when they need it to lift those families out of poverty. This support, this whole family support, will not have the immediate impact of ending the two-child cap, but it is an example of the sustained, smarter policy making we are delivering in government. The baby box, the expansion of early learning, family nurse partnerships, the Scottish Child Payment. These policies are helping to transform the life chances of children in our country. That is the investment we are making in Scotland's future. And delegates, we will also prioritise our public services, including our cherished National Health Service. We will bring forward reforms to shift the balance of care to preventative and community-based support. Of course, none of this could be possible without the hard work, day in, day out, of our NHS staff. I'm determined we do everything we can to support them. That's why the pay deal the SNP government has put on the table will ensure Scotland's nurses and NHS staff are the best paid in the United Kingdom, and we should be proud of that. In our primary schools, we've got record levels of literacy and numeracy. Every young person deserves the best possible education, and I will ensure that all of us, government, councils, teachers and parents, are able to play our part in delivering that. In housing, the SNP have delivered over 40% more affordable homes per head of population than in England and over 70% more than in Wales. But it's not enough. I'm acutely aware we face a housing emergency, and my government will do everything we can within the powers and resources that we have to tackle that housing crisis. So, Conference, so that we can work to end child poverty and to sustain our public services, we need to have a dynamic Scottish economy, an economy that can transition to net zero. In office, the SNP has been building a greener economy. When we took office, renewable technologies generated the equivalent of around 20% of Scotland's gross electricity consumption. Since then, this has soared to 113%, from 20 to 113. Now, conference, just think about that. Scotland is literally bursting with energy. Yet as part of the UK, we're paying some of the highest energy prices in Europe. And what has our new Labour government done about all of this? Well, Labour promised to cut energy bills by £300. But in October, at the start of winter, energy bills will rise by an average of £149, and 900,000 pensioners in Scotland will lose their winter heating payment. Delegates, Labour should be ashamed to show either of their two faces in Scotland ever again. Our renewables revolution is gathering pace. We've supported Sumitomo, bringing up to 300 jobs to the Cromarty Firth as part of a growing offshore wind supply chain. We're supporting investment at Ardesir Port so it can become a critical offshore wind hub and a major source of jobs and growth. The Highlands of Scotland, breathtaking in their beauty, and now a vibrant centre of renewables-based manufacturing. That's the kind of action we are delivering in government. These projects are symbolic of my ambitions for the Scottish economy. They are illustrative of what I want my ministers to be securing every day of every week, so they can't say they weren't warned. I want my ministers out there getting investment, investment, investment in the future of Scotland. That is how we will grow the economy and create the fair and just society of our aspirations. The latest survey on inward investment from the financial services firm EY said this recently. Scotland outpaced both the UK and Europe with foreign direct investment growth last year. That's good news, very good news. But we need to build on that performance and make it better. Because when we look at small independent countries across Europe, they have higher business investment than the UK, higher productivity, higher living standards, lower inequality and lower levels of poverty. That, my friends, is what independence brings. And would Scotland be able to achieve that? We are a country not just of extraordinary energy resources, but an exceptional food and drink sector, advanced manufacturing, outstanding strength in creativity and innovation, some of the world's very best and finest universities, thriving financial and business services, magnificent cities and breathtaking scenery for the best tourism experience anywhere on the planet, and above all else, we have our talented and resourceful people. Scotland has what it takes to be a successful independent nation. The SNP fought elections in 2017, in 2019 and in 2021 on a manifesto commitment to hold a referendum on independence. We won each of these elections, and each time with a higher share of the vote than Labour achieved either here in Scotland or across the UK back on the 4th of July. In each of those elections, the Westminster parties denied and continue to deny Scottish democracy. They blocked the democratic will of the people of Scotland. They couldn't have been more short-sighted, because they have destroyed the basis upon which many people in Scotland believe the UK to be founded, an equal partnership of nations and a voluntary union. I'll tell you what an equal partnership looks like. An independent Scotland, working in harmony with our closest friends in the rest of the UK, and back where we belong, not part of a broken Brexit Britain, but back at the very beating heart of Europe as an independent country. Conference, one of the conclusions I've drawn from the Westminster election, and I've thought about it a lot, and I've engaged with you all about it, and we've discussed it at this conference, has led me to a fundamental commitment that I'll make to you, which is this. Never again will we go into an election with people thinking, I like the idea of independence, but that can wait because I'm more concerned about the economy, or my job, or the cost of living, or the National Health Service. My promise to you is that I will make sure independence is understood as the route to a stronger and a fairer country. Understood not as nice to have, but as urgent and essential here and now. That is how we will make independence happen. So my leadership is about earning the right to be heard by delivering on the public's priorities. It's about people, prosperity, public services and the planet, staying true to our values amid Westminster austerity, total faith in Scottish democracy, and campaigning on an independence platform deeply intertwined with people's everyday concerns. That is how we will lead our country to a more hopeful and optimistic future with independence. Delegates, if you ever wanted to remind yourself what hope, optimism, and a sense of possibility feel like, cast your minds back a decade. 2014 was an incredible year where real change was truly in the air. It began with one of the most significant moments in the history of our country, when members of the Scottish Parliament debated and approved equal marriage legislation. Love did triumph. It was a year where Scotland showcased herself to the world as we hosted the Commonwealth Games and the Ryder Cup. It was a year when Scotland was energised as we debated our future as a country, a debate rich with imagination and excitement. It was contagious and it was empowering. Delegates, in a few weeks' time, it will be exactly 10 years since the independence referendum. 10 years on, we live in a United Kingdom that took away our European citizenship. A UK reeling from the almost unimaginable premierships of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And while a Labour Prime Minister once arrived in Downing Street to the tune of "things can only get better," the current Labour Prime Minister tells us quite openly that things can only get worse. That's not the future Scotland was promised in 2014. We were told we were better together. We were promised, and don't laugh too much, strong and stable. But instead, in 2024, a Labour government tells us the United Kingdom is in the worst economic state since World War II. So, my friends, it falls on us, the National Party of Scotland, to awaken that sense of optimism and hope amongst our fellow Scots, to rekindle the imagination of our nation, to show them that a better future is possible, to unite our country to win independence. That is what we have got to do, and that is what we are going to do. Conference. Conference. Conference, when I joined this party as a teenager, I didn't really, in all honesty, know what I was getting myself into. I can still remember heading out to my very first SNP branch meeting, only a couple of miles from where we are today. On the way out to the house, I remember my mother shouting to me, "Whatever you do, don't go to the pub." Delegates, I went to the pub. That's because I'd made friends with a bunch of incredibly passionate and committed, like-minded people. Dedicated activists who were determined to get the job done. Some of them, sadly, didn't live to see the reconvening of the Scottish Parliament and one of their local lads joining its membership. And many knew they might never see the independent Scotland for which they campaigned their whole lives. But they also knew that without their efforts, without their passion, these goals would never, ever be achieved. And they've passed the torch on to us. Over the years, I've been privileged to have a front row seat as this nation has steadily grown in confidence, taken the first steps to self-government and rediscovering our own voice on the international stage. Every other morning, I get up and go for a run through the streets of Edinburgh. It clears my head and gets me ready for the day. But it does something else. When I watch the rising sun light up the buildings of this ancient and stunning city, I often think about how I'm looking at the very same steeples, the very same streets, and the very same geology that inspired some of the greatest minds ever to have lived. Visionaries who understood the world around them, not only as it was, but who had the imagination to see things differently and to show others what they could see. And that, my friends, is the spirit that we, still in the early morning of this century, must capture in our own small way. We rightly celebrate Scotland's significant contribution to the modern world, but doing so is only worthwhile if it motivates us to build a modern Scotland that contributes every bit as much, if not more, to the world of tomorrow. I have complete faith in the people of Scotland to take the right decisions about their future. If we give them the tools, they can build whatever country they want. Scotland has got what it takes. We can be a successful, happy, and prosperous nation. There is much that lies ahead of us that we know about, but much that we don't. Whatever our future holds, that future will be better if it's created by us, the people of Scotland. We have to make it happen, and we have to do so together. Thank you very much.